Happy Alien Day, horror fans. Anchorpete here, and I am with my chest-bursting buddy over there, Dr. Zayas God, Danny Torkel. Hello,
What's
sir.
up? What's going on?
Danny, I get super fucking excited on April 26th, LV 426, because I love the Alien series so much. And last year I got the idea, hey, let's make a video for each one of my 3 channels focusing on some kind of alien property. And you, my friend, had such a great recommendation. You were able to tie in Shudder to all of this. And so you want to tell everybody what we're going to talk about today?
So Shudder put this really great documentary that was made back in 2019 called Memory, The Origins of Alien. It put it back on its rotation this month, probably for 426 coming up on Tuesday or today, depending on when we're releasing this. It was directed by Alexander O. Philippe, and he's pretty much the best documentarian of like behind the scenes on horror films. He's done Dock of the Dead, which was about I think Night of the Living Dead and the zombie movies. He did 7852, which is about the infamous shower scene in Psycho. He also did Leap of Faith, which is basically just an incredible conversation with William Friedkin about The Exorcist. And then he also did, one of his first ones was The People versus George Lucas, which I don't know if you ever saw that. I know you're a probably a bigger Star Wars fan than I am, and I love Star Wars, but that was a super fun documentary also. This guy really knows what he's doing with especially genre film documentaries. And like I was telling you before we started recording, I was taking notes for about the first 45 minutes. And then I just put the pen down because I was just enjoying this documentary so much. And I've seen it already. This is the second time I'm watching it. And I was just so enthralled with everything, all the behind the scenes stuff about one of the greatest sci-fi horror films ever made. I was just like, you know what? I'm going to put the pen down, just enjoy the rest of this.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was really fucking enjoyable. And I want to check out his other documentaries because I just like how well made this was. And it has a really interesting beginning, which I want to talk to you about. But I wanted to mention that Psycho documentary that you talked about, 7852, because I just looked them up on Wikipedia. And the way that they described that documentary was it was like a documentary that focused on the shower scene in Psycho. And I feel like with this documentary, Memory, The Origins of Alien, there was a big focus on the chest burster scene in particular.
Yeah, the whole like last 20 to 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Is.
Yeah, so I like the idea of thinking about a movie and thinking about like sort of the iconic moments of a movie. And here's spoilers for Alien and spoilers for Seven, if you guys haven't seen these movies that are like decades old. But I feel like in the case of these 2 movies, at least, there's often behind the scenes stories of like, well, this movie wasn't going to get made, or it was hard to sell this movie. But then there's this one scene, and people always talk about how they're like, this is the scene that everyone is going to remember. And of course, when you talk about Alien, you talk about the chest burster scene. When you talk about Seven, you talk about the head in the box scene. And it's like these moments that's what everyone remembers. And it almost seems like, lightning strikes when someone comes up with that particular idea. And that's a big focus of this documentary.
Yeah. To your point, there's at least 3 or 4 times where they talk about people who were like skeptical of the film, and then they read the script and they all have this moment of like, fuck me, like where they get to that part in the script and they're like, oh shit. And there's the really great line from the guy who wrote the film with Dan O'Bannon,
Shush it, right?
Yes, where he called, where he was the one that came up with the idea of like how the monster would get inside of Kane, the character of Kane, and I just love the scene in the documentary where he like wakes up Dan O'Bannon. He's like, I got it. The alien's gonna fuck him.
Right.
And there's so much of that, and that of course leads to the chest bursting scene. And they like Roger Corman, even Ridley Scott, who's not actually, they show interviews with him. He's not like a talking head in this, but he even talks about in interviews about how he was like reading the script, okay, and then he got to that scene and was like, okay, here we go.
Right. And so I definitely want to go in depth about the chest burster scene. And so we can kind of get to that towards the end because that's how it is in the documentary. But like you just mentioned a bunch of players that are behind the scenes of this movie of Alien, and we see I think his name is Ronald Schurstit. I can't even say his fucking last name, but he's interviewed in this, and like you said, you see clips of Ridley Scott. The thing about this documentary is that I've seen a few documentaries now about the making of Alien, or things that are sort of tangential to the making of Alien. Like, and you probably have this on the shelf right behind you, but there's these great fucking Alien DVDs that came out in a set, and you could get each one individually. And they had these like making of Alien documentaries, and they use some of the footage from them in this movie, like especially when they're talking to Dan O'Bannon, you know. And I loved that fucking documentary, and I'd watch it over and over again.
Yeah, the only set I have up there is like the original Alien 4-pack. I think it's DVD, is not even Blu-rays. That's how old that is. In fact, when I introduced Charlotte to Alien and Aliens, instead of pulling that off the shelf, I found them streaming. And for Aliens, we watched like the 2.5 hour, the 2 hour and 40-minute extended, the Haley's Hope edition with like the whole extra. And I'm almost 40. We're almost 40 years old. I had never seen that before. And I'm like, whoa, like it's like watching Terminator 2 with all the, you could watch Terminator 2 with all the extra footage in there too. And it's jarring almost to watch, especially for the first time. But
yeah, you know, I'm really glad that you brought that up too, because like I said, we're recording this on all three of my channels. On the Anchorpete channel, we're going to have Danny come over too, and we're going to talk about Aliens in depth too. And then on the other channel that I do with my friend Brian, who's been on this channel before, we're going to, on Comic Books Transformed, we're going to talk about the first Marvel comic of an Alien book, because Marvel recently got the rights to Alien. And so we're going to talk about the very first Alien trade.
That's right. The Alien Queen is now a Disney princess.
Yes. And there is an interesting kind of female alien in that book that's not the Alien Queen. So I want you to check out that episode, me and Brian too. But the documentary that I was talking about, I love so much because it's a well done documentary as well, and there's so many interesting things about the creation of Alien and just going from Dan O'Bannon's story idea to the final product. And besides that, there's also, and I'm sure you've seen this too, I think we've even talked about it, but Jodorowsky's Dune too. That's another.
I've actually never seen the documentary.
Okay.
I just did a review for our channel on the Cursed Films episode of Stalker. And Stalker is directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, who's this very well-known genre director. Right. And I mentioned in that review how there's always I consider myself a cinephile, you know, mock me all you want, comment section. I've watched a lot of classic films, all genres, and there are some directors that have just completely flew under my radar. Tarkovsky is one, and Jodorowsky is another. And so it's funny, I actually wrote down Jodorowsky's Dune, and then I circled it and wrote, watch it. Like, I'm upset. Like, I know the whole story behind Jodorowsky, like being like set to make Dune and then it getting like pulled out from under him. And basically David Lynch made it and he considers it like his worst movie.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. His biggest failure. Absolutely. Yeah. I actually went on a podcast, and one of the guys that's going to join us for our Aliens discussion on Anchor Pete is Mike Bongiorno. And on his podcast, we specifically talked about, Jodorowsky's Dune and David Lynch's Dune, and then the Denis Villeneuve Dune. But the interesting thing about Jodorowsky's Dune is I've never seen any of his films either, but he is a super passionate guy. And one of the focuses of Jodorowsky's Dune is that he brought together this team of like artists and creators, including Dan O'Bannon, and then Giger, and then Mobius too, who's another artist as well. And they didn't mention the other artists working on Alien in this documentary, but they really focused on Giger a lot. And big part of this documentary was how important it was that Dan O'Bannon met Giger and then brought Giger onto Alien.
It's amazing how Giger got fired, and and then they mentioned, and there are things, because I said I've watched this documentary. This is the second time I watched it. Things that I remembered, but then also things that I forgot. Like I forgot Walter Hill was attached to direct this, and I cannot like Walter Hill is kind of like a gritty, like kind of films like action movies type. Yeah. Like doesn't he do like, didn't he end up doing the Beverly Hills Cop movies?
Something, man. Yeah, he's definitely made some 80s action movies.
And I think he might have done The Warriors.
Yes.
So like when I think of Walter Hill, I think of like Alien is just literally in another universe from what I think of with Walter Hill. So thank God.
Right.
And no disrespect to Walter Hill. I just thank God Ridley Scott got attached to it. And yeah, it's basically, you have O'Bannon and then you have Giger, and then you have Ridley Scott is actually the third part of that comes together. And like this three-headed monster ends up creating, the film.
Yes. And for that three-headed monster, one of my absolute favorite aspects is Ridley Scott. The more I am watch things about him, watch his interviews, the more I love him. And the thing is, I often like rank my 5 favorite directors, and I never put him in it. But I think back on it, and I'm like, dude, he is just this incredible fucking talent. Like every fucking movie he makes is beautiful, and some of the things that he's made are just like next level, like nothing's even close to it. An Alien. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, because one of the things that they mention here that in this documentary is Ridley Scott as a visual storyteller. Mm-hmm. And it's weird that because his filmography is so expansive, you think of him as like this master director first. But then I stop and I think and I go, he's weird for me. I don't love a lot of his films, but even the films of his I don't love, they're gorgeous. Like Prometheus is the greatest example. Prometheus is one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen. I could list, I have a list a mile long of flaws with Prometheus. I don't hate it, but it's a flawed film, but it's gorgeous. When I teach global history, I always show parts of Kingdom of Heaven. Kingdom of Heaven was his 2.5-hour sprawling epic about the Crusades. It's not a great movie. It's slow. It's boring. There are large sections of this like historical epic about a holy war where nothing happens. That said, it is stunning to watch. And I cherry pick 5 to 10 scenes that last about 20, 25 minutes for my students. And you can't hear a pin drop in the room because everybody's actually focused on the film. I would never show them the whole movie, but it's just beautiful to watch. And you really get that at like, they even mentioned when he came on, the first thing he did was he started storyboarding. He didn't even like write anything. He just immediately went to storyboarding. And you really get a sense of him as a visual presenter more than just a filmmaker.
Right. And one of the best things about this documentary is they talk about how involved he is. And they talk about how he essentially shot 80% of the movie. And I think sometimes people get confused and they think that the director is the guy behind the camera too, but he's not. But in this case, Ridley was using the camera. He was taking the shots himself. And he also set up the lighting. They mentioned how he set up a lot of the lighting in the movie too. So it's very much like his vision. And one of the things that they mentioned in this documentary, see, this is one of the reasons why I love this documentary so much, is that I always feel like I know so much about Alien, but then I get these little tidbits in this movie that are like things that you wouldn't necessarily know from like reading about the production of it, but it's like little insights that they have. And they were talking about how Ridley Scott is always moving the camera in the movie. The camera's never like static and just like static shots where people walk in. It's always like the camera's moving and there's a lot of it's a lot of handheld footage. That gives that sense of realism, but they say, or Ridley Scott says in this documentary, that it makes things tense, that you like it never slows down. You always feel on edge. And that's the thing that I never thought of, but obviously watching the movie, I've felt that effect since the very first time I ever saw it. So like that's why I highly recommend, if you guys haven't seen this documentary, that you go out and see it, because as a guy who loves the story behind the scenes, this has so many great tidbits in it.
Yeah, I loved the whole idea of they're talking about they also compare him to they show the scenes in like Kubrick films where the camera like is just focused on like a large crew of people, and then when like a fight takes place, the camera goes right into it. Like they showed the scene in Clockwork Orange where it's like this scene from afar, and then when the violence starts, it goes right up in your face, and it's handheld and following the action. And then they do that with the chestburster scene later, where it's like this wide shot of everybody eating at the table, everybody's having fun, and then boom, we get close up, cameras moving all over, following the action of what's going on with Kane. There's stuff like that throughout, and it just they also compared him to Robert Altman, and the way that they compared it to MASH, where and it's weird. You never think about these things, but it's one of the only movies where there's an entire cast on the screen at one time, and they're not speaking in lines of dialogue at each other one at a time. They're all, it's like family dinner where they're all just yelling at each other, and they're talking at normal volume. And, you know, I just had Passover and Easter dinner last weekend, and that's exactly what it's like. It's like everybody's at the table, everybody's talking, everybody's passing stuff around. There's no, it's my turn to talk. Now it's your turn to talk. And I feel like that feels like something in the screenwriting process where it would be very easy to just say, okay, this person speaks, then this person speaks. How do you even write a scene like that where everybody's talking at one time? I feel like in the script, it would just say casual dinner conversation.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
All right, go. And everybody just starts talking.
Right. Or they might say there's like a murmur in the room of all different conversations, and then they would like probably focus on specific dialogue that's important to the plot. But yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I know that type of filmmaking, they do it a lot. I think they do it in Spielberg films too. I mean, obviously, like, you know, they use the Robert Altman example, and it's not just him though. But I always wanted like a term for that or something, and they just kind of succinctly explained it. The one guy, I didn't know that director. I didn't write down his fucking name either, but he made a movie called Holidays. Do you know who I'm talking about? The guy the one that makes that point. He says sonically the movie feels like a Robert Altman film, and he's this kind of younger director compared to the other guys in this documentary.
Was it Adam Egypt Mortimer? He did Daniel Isn't Real also, which
shit. Oh man, if he's the guy
that's who you're talking about.
Okay, if he's the guy that in the, because you know when they do a documentary, they always say like what else they made, and it said Holidays, and I should have fucking looked them up.
Holidays was an anthology, so he might have done like a scene in that anthology.
Okay, so you're saying that he made John Dies at the End?
No, Daniel Isn't Real.
Oh, Daniel Isn't Real. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm mixing it up with fucking what's his face's movie too? Don Coscarelli. Wrong
Coscarelli did that, and that was based on a book by an author
that I love. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But yeah, we're going off on a little tangent there. But like, one of the points I wanted to make, though, while we're still talking about Ridley, is that nowadays, and I think that if you and I made movies, we'd probably be like this too. But I think from our generation, a
Classics,
lot
yeah.
of times we would make movies and reference scenes in other movies, right? But Ridley, and I know this from like Blade Runner documentaries I've watched and from this documentary, Ridley is often inspired by artwork. And I know that for that chest burster scene, they refer to Francis Bacon. And to me,
Oh my
that
God,
yeah,
those
that
paintings.
that right, right. That's what elevates the chest burster scene, and that's what elevates Ridley's work in general. You know, you and I, and I'm fucking just making plugs left and right today. But you and I, we talked about Raised by Wolves on the Comic Books Transform channel. We went in depth about that show. We did every episode. Um, Ridley is obviously involved in that show too. That show has religious iconography like up the ass, like all over the place, amazing shots. And it's just like he draws from a much older set of imagery from artwork, you know,
Yeah,
and it shows. That's why his things are like elevated, you
that
know?
I'm really embarrassed because I was saying how like Ridley Scott such a visual storyteller, and I didn't mention Blade Runner. And I think the reason I didn't mention Blade Runner is because I don't love Blade Runner. And but as somebody who loves film history, I will always say that it's one of it has to be ranked highly amongst sci-fi films ever made, just because of how influential it was to the genre in the decade since. It's been 40 years since the movie came out, and it's still impacting the way people make movies.
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous movie.
Yes.
I don't love it. I still don't think I've ever stayed awake through it, but it's beautiful. It's a beautiful movie full of amazing shots,
Yes.
and that's just another Ridley Scott visual masterpiece.
Yes. Yes. And you know, it's because of him that Alien is so embedded into our consciousness, and that, you know, his appreciation of art, I'm sure, let Giger kind of run wild. And the Alien is just like a part of our collective human unconsciousness,
Well,
or
that's
subconsciousness. I'm sorry, not
yeah,
we're all knocked out. But what I was gonna say was that a big focus of this documentary is about sort of how they channel like stuff from ancient artwork and Greek myths and our like dreams, and
mm-hmm.
it's into Alien, you know. And you kind of got excited when I mentioned the art, and I think you were going to reference this Francis Bacon painting that is the influence for the chest burster imagery. And they do this whole thing in this documentary where they go off on this tangent about Francis Bacon. And I actually didn't know a lot about him, but in this documentary, they talk about how he had a certain style up until he was about 35. Then he releases this one image, which is called, I believe it was called A Study at the Foot of the Crucifixion. And it has these like three different images, and they're all these weird, distorted creatures, these like kind of nightmare creatures. And the thing is that Giger's alien imagery is so iconic and taps into something to where when you look at any artist afterwards, you can, or at least horror artist, you can feel that influence of
Yeah.
Giger. And I feel like Giger and Ridley Scott were directly influenced by this Francis Bacon artwork.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I mean, we did a deep dive of Predator not that long ago.
yeah.
When you're talking about the all-time movie monsters or creations, the Alien in Alien is got to be near the top. And if it wasn't for the artwork of Giger, who knows what it might have looked like. And I mean, we could talk about the filmmaking and everything else, but if the xenomorph doesn't look like the xenomorph, then this is probably they make reference to one of the original titles of the movie was Star Beast, and it would probably look like a cheesy B-level movie called Star Beast.
Right.
and it would probably look like one of the million of movies that came out from 80 to 85 that were all actually probably all of them produced by Roger Corman, who was very close to actually making the movie because he was going to, he actually told Dan O'Bannon to go and find more money. And if you can't find more money, I'll make the movie. And then the joke, of course, is that Corman then went and made like 50 Alien ripoffs.
Right.
Like Galaxy of Terror and Creepazoids. Like, all these movies are just shameless Alien ripoffs that came out in the decade after, and most of them are produced by Corman.
Yes, yes. And when the documentary is at that point where we're talking about Roger Corman and they even are interviewing him, they talk about this one line that Dan O'Bannon said, which is, "I didn't steal from anyone. I stole from everyone."
I have a list of all the things he stole from too.
Right. And you just referenced these sort of the pre-Alien sci-fi movies and then the post-Alien sci-fi movies. And what's really interesting is I've watched all these documentaries on Alien, but I don't know if I've seen all of these references that they made. Of course, like they've referenced the original thing often when they talk about Alien. They reference Lovecraft and at the Mountains of Madness. They reference that often when they're talking about Aliens' influences. But then they showed like these different comics, and some of the plots for like these comics were like the same fucking plot as Alien.
Seeds of Jupiter from 1951. Yeah, Death Rattle was one, and then they had like another list of like 50s and 60s sci-fi films that I had never I had heard of it, The Terror from Beyond Space, but I didn't really know what it was about. And then you hear the plot and you're like, oh, that sounds kind of familiar. Or Queen of Blood. That was another one. Where they show the scene at the end where it's like the queen has laid all these eggs and they're I also think, the whole first part of the documentary spends a lot of time talking about Dan O'Bannon, and O'Bannon, I feel like he was so close to becoming a much more recognizable name, and he should be a more recognizable name. He made Dark Star with John Carpenter. They basically have a falling out over who gets the director credit. And then they basically go off and make competing Alien films. A couple of years, Carpenter, of course, goes and makes The Thing in 1982. O'Bannon writes Alien. He also wrote and directed Return of the Living Dead. One of my favorite zombie movies, horror comedies ever made. And then he kind of just he made a few other movies, and then I think he got really sick in the early 2000s, and he passed away rather young. The documentary said from complications from Crohn's disease. I thought he had cancer too, but I don't know. But they showed clips of him later in life, and he looked very worn down. But he's a name that I don't feel enough people recognize. Like, he was part of that same USC group with like Carpenter, and just before them, I think, was like Lucas and Spielberg, and it was They even like they even start with like Star Wars and Close Encounters as like the two Aliens movies that come out right before Alien. And then they make the joke about how by 1982 we decided America wanted its aliens cuddly, so E.T. was great and everybody hated The Thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very different Alien movie from like what we remember as kids, and like what everyone was obsessed with back in the day, and even Star Wars too. Like Star Wars was such a big impact, and then all of a sudden you have Alien at this bleak, fucking realistic kind of space horror movie. I haven't seen other, because I know you talk about Return of the Living Dead a lot, and I actually have not seen it. I know that when we did the Lovecraft month, you covered a Lovecraft story that O'Bannon made into a movie, right? What's that one?
The Resurrected?
The Resurrected, right?
Did he write that?
He directed it too.
Oh, okay. I have it up there. I have to look.
Right. But so anyway, but Dan O'Bannon's wife gets interviewed quite a bit, and she talks about how like he grew up in this very rural area, and they didn't have a telephone, and he was able to get books like by having someone like drop off a box of books. They didn't even have like a library in their town, you know. And the documentary kind of bookends it because they have that in the beginning, and at the very end, she talks about how like he kind of came from the past, but then he could see into the future, or like he grew up in this farm, but they end up in space, she says, right? And you know, obviously he was able to channel something. And one of the things that I think is really weird, and I kind of wanted to get your take on it. There's a guy in the documentary. Here I am as an asshole. I don't remember the guy's name, but he's a professor, and he usually talks about what's his face, Joseph Campbell stuff. Like it says Joseph Campbell. He's like a Joseph Campbell teacher in this documentary. They show him quite a bit, and he talks about like myth a lot. I mean, that makes sense since he works at like a Joseph Campbell school or whatever, right? And that's one of the things about this documentary that the other alien documentary doesn't have, is where it sort of talks about like our human experience and how like alien like connects with us deeply, and it like makes it kind of metaphysical. And the thing that was so weird about this movie is that when I first started watching it, they have this weird scene with these like old women, kind of like, I'm sorry, women that are in the movie, but like these sort of haggish looking women, like kind of wake up and they have like metallic teeth. And I kind of had to check Shutter a couple of times. I'm like, am I watching the right fucking movie? Like, what is going on?
I did exactly the same thing. I did not remember that opening. And I was like, did I put on the, okay, no. All right. Let's see where this goes.
Right. And so like, I thoroughly enjoyed this documentary, but that opening I felt was like a little out of place. That might be my one detractor. I'm like, okay, well, why is there this opening? Is it just to kind of stimulate us before we just get to the talking heads parts? And I know they make this connection with the Furies that are in Greek mythology. I know a little bit about the Furies. There's actually an arc of the Sandman comic, which is one of my favorite comics, and that's one of my favorite arcs of that comic. Is called the Furies, and they're in it. But I couldn't really make that connection with the Furies and the chest burster. And I was wondering if you were able to do that.
No, I was a little confused. I mean, I get the idea that like they do spend a lot of time talking about historically, like the documentary is called Memory, the Origins of Alien, and they really go into for the most part, the origins, like things that went on to bring this movie to light. And they do, like you mentioned, they talk about Greek history. They talk about, is it Giger went to Egypt and he fell in love with Egypt. And some of the early storyboards were that when they land on LV 426, there's actually a pyramid. And so I just kind of made a connection to those three women at the beginning are, you know, almost like primordial beings, kind of in the way that the engineer would be at the beginning of Prometheus. And it just, you know, that, or like the witches at the beginning of Macbeth or something to that effect. And like, you know, it's kind of like a darkness that lives inside of us that creates these horrible nightmarish stories and art and things like that. So that was the only connection that I could make. I did the exact same thing as you though. Like the movie started, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then like 2 minutes later, I'm like, oh, okay, we're watching the movie. Okay.
Right. Well, when they reference the Furies, there's a lot of discussion about like the patriarchy and misogyny and then femininity, right? And how Alien is kind of this response to the male treatment of women, right? And then they talk about that Alien, and I've heard this many times over with Alien. There's, you know, there's male rape in it, and there's male birth, and it's a fantasy for male rape and a fantasy of male birth, and you know, it's just like it's not even like subtext; it's just like right in your face. And I think that's
that's what the guy said when he woke up and he was like, "I got it." The alien fucks him. Like
right. Yeah, it's like literally in your face. It's on your face, right?
Yeah.
And so like it's so interesting because they even mention it in this documentary that it's like somehow this movie got approved. Like they let this idea go through, although it's created, right? And like the whole idea of the chest burster itself, because they talk about it in this documentary, and I keep saying that they talk about it in this documentary. You guys see this documentary because it's so fucking good. Go see it if you haven't seen it yet. But like the guy from Turner Classic Movies, I think he's the
Ben
one.
Mankiewicz.
Right. He's in this documentary too. I think he's the guy, but basically he talks about the setup for the chest burster scene. And I think the guy that directed Holidays talks about it too. And they talk about how, like, you know that it's coming. The chest burster's coming. They give you these sort of little clues, like Kane coughs a little bit, and your mind kind of makes that connection of, oh, something's happening. Then they talk about how the scene itself is like lit up, and there's this one shot when Kane first wakes up after the facehugger comes off, and the whole crew is in this one shot, right? And so that in a typical horror movie, that's where you could relax because you'd feel safe. Like, here's everybody, and it's super brightly lit, but then it just like flips on its fucking head.
They even make a comparison where they're like, this is the perfect Ridley Scott shot. Oh, and then here's a shot in Alien Covenant where Ridley Scott does it, but does it badly. And I thought that was so funny how they're like, look at how great Ridley Scott is and the way he does this shot with everyone in the room brightly lit. You would never expect it. You would expect it to look like this crappy shot in Alien Covenant.
That's right.
And I'm like, they really did throw shade a little bit at Alien Covenant, which I think that's a movie that deserves some shade thrown at it. So
yeah. When they showed that scene with Billy Crudup in this movie, and then I remember the chest burster coming out, and it doesn't look like the chest burster in Alien.
It's like a fully formed alien.
Yeah. I hated that shit. And like I remember David kind of goes like this, and the alien goes, oh, so bad. But like, let's go into that chest burster scene because that's such a big part of this documentary. And like it's like masterful filmmaking, right? Because first of all, they don't really talk about it in this documentary, but John Hurt, we really should talk about how good his fucking acting is in that particular scene. Because there's no doubt in your mind when you watch this movie that there's a creature burrowing out of this fucking man. And like the way that he reacts, it's like that's amazing fucking acting. And they talk about setting up this scene and how like he's in the table essentially, and he's like sitting in a certain way, and the rest is like a dummy. And they have this puppet. And I think before we even get to that, we should talk about Giger's puppets. Do you remember that part of the documentary?
The chickens?
Yeah.
And then they had like the big puppet that looked like a turkey with no feathers. They described it. Like some of those are legitimately bad. Like there's no other way to describe them. Like if that's what the chest burster looked like, nobody would have loved this movie.
Right.
And then the funny thing is like Veronica Cartwright, the actress who's in the movie is like, and then they bring out this like penis looking thing, and you're like, yeah, that's pretty much what they went with, the puppet that
right. This
penis which went back to the Bacon, Francis Bacon painting, but like
right, exactly. And they say that it does that one scream when it comes out, right? And they said that that's kind of tying it to the Furies. That's like their weird kind of loose connection to the Furies. But it's interesting because we've been talking. Well, you've actually on our channel been talking about cursed films a lot, and I've been getting into cursed films on Shudder because we did Rosemary's Baby. And then Sherry and I just watched the Poltergeist episode last night too. And it's kind of interesting because like the girl from Poltergeist, people thought that she had Crohn's disease, but then she had that weird thing with her intestines. But that's okay. That's a different thing altogether. But like on the cursed films, they talk about the myth about Alien, where the myth is that the people didn't know what the chest burster was or what was going to happen, and it was like a shock to them, and it's only kind of partially true. they hadn't seen the puppet, but they knew it was coming. And like, it's kind of funny because I didn't know that the chest burster kind of fucked up the first time they tried it too.
Yeah,
You know?
it's one of those happy accidents, like the shark not working in Jaws, where it works out to everyone's advantage and it makes the movie better. My favorite thing in the whole documentary is they keep the camera on. They show you the original footage and they keep the camera on Veronica Cartwright. So she does the oh god with the blood, and then she literally trips and does a full like back roll.
Right.
Because she tripped over a stool on set, and then she's like, and then I realized the scene was still going, so I just popped back up and ran back to where the camera was and was like, it's so funny. Why? Oh man,
I love her and I love Lambert and I love the whole crew, and like that chest burster scene. You never realize it because their acting is so good, but they're talking about how like when they put it Kane together, they used offal, which is like cow innards or whatever.
Yeah.
For a lot of the guts. And like they were saying that the lights were on and like it's just basically cooking it. And it must have been this like miserable fucking smell.
Yeah. She described it. She's like, you didn't have to, there were no signs where the set was. You just followed the smell.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like I think like, you know, as we kind of like wrap this up, you know, and since we're doing it on all three channels, I think that we should actually just focus on the crew of Alien, like the actual crew of the Nostromo, because in our other two shows, we're not going to be talking about that particular crew, but yet like the crew is so fucking important. All the characters are so important. And they only talk about Ripley a little bit in this documentary. And they pretty much spend the same amount of screen time talking about Ash. And the thing is, last year when I did this, I talked with my wife, Sherry, about Alien, and we talked a lot about Ripley and we talked a lot about Ash. We kind of started out with Ash, then we went to Ripley. And there's another plug. You guys go check that out on the Anchorpete channel. We talk about Alien. But like what they talk about with Ash in this documentary is really fucking interesting too. Do you agree?
I mean, yeah. And that's another great actor who just passed away recently, Ian Holm. I had so much trouble looking at him in The Fifth Element when he was like a good guy, because all I had remembered him was this movie, and I just remembered being scared to death of him, like especially. You know, and then it's one of those things where you go back and you watch the movie again and you're like, of course he's working for the corporation. Like makes perfect sense. Like everything he does sabotages the crew along the way. But one thing that I loved, and, you know, because obviously Ripley is the character everyone talks about. One of the first, you know, female protagonists, one of the first lead females. The fact that all the characters were written unisex, and that basically like they just have their last names. So they very easily could have cast a man to be Ripley with no change at all in the dialogue.
Right.
Which I think was it Clark Wolf or Clark
Wolf?
Yeah. She makes the point, like, isn't that a little, it's almost insulting that like the greatest female protagonist of all time was written kind of without femininity at all into the equation. And maybe that's why people associate her as being a great character, which is kind of annoying to think about. But I love that the documentary focused a lot on Brett and Parker.
Oh, yes.
Because to me, one of the things that, again, when you watch this movie as a kid, or the first time you watch it, you're not picking up the themes of like, you know, corporatization in the workforce. You're not picking up on the, you know, the workers are expendable versus the bottom line of the capitalist corporation at the helm. You don't pick up on any of that when you're a kid. As an adult, and now you're part of the machine, you're a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
You really start to identify. And the fact that not only are they really developed characters, the grunts, but they're, especially Parker, is like outspokenly right all the time. Ash comes back on the ship with the alien on his face. Kane comes back on the ship with the alien on his face, and Parker's like, we should just freeze him. Have the doctors look at him when we get home. Why are we studying him? He's obviously infected with something. Just put him in. And nobody listens to him because he's just a grunt worker.
Right.
And I love that the two of them care more about like the bottom line. Like, we're getting a raise, right? Like we're going to make our overtime, right? It's the questions that like I have. Like I just applied in New York. We have Regents exams in high school. I just applied to do Regents grading in June to get extra money. So I'm like, am I going to get this? Am I going to get this like extra money gig? Because I could really use like 3 extra days of overtime pay as we go into the summer. That would be really nice.
Would be nice.
Yeah. And I feel like now as an adult, I identify more with Parker and Brett than I do with any of the other characters on the ship.
Right. And it's so interesting too, because like the best part, one of the best parts of the documentary, because there's a lot of great parts, but one of the best parts you kind of just referred to is that they Parker and Brett kind of recommend freezing Kane, like you just said. And you see Dallas kind of thinking about it, and the way that the shot is framed, they talk about it in this documentary, how like they're in the front, and so like they're closer to the audience, and Dallas is further back, and it's all about like no. Dallas is right next to the audience at first, and Parker's
he gets up and he walks away.
He gets up and he walks away, and then Lambert comes in and she says some kind of like sci-fi kind of mumbo jumbo shit, and it's like he makes a decision. But as you were talking about these characters, it just made me realize, I don't know why it took me to be 39 fucking years old, haven't seen Alien many times, but like every single member of the crew is like a noteworthy, acclaimed actor. It's like some of them probably had careers beforehand, but then this movie just is like such a cultural event. Every single of those actors is acclaimed, and you can point out movies that they're in. And like, I think for me as a kid, or like as a teenager getting into movies and a young adult, like I didn't necessarily recognize Harry Dean Stanton. I always knew Yaphet Kotto from like Homicide: Life on the Street. He was like the main chief or whatever. But like, I didn't really recognize Harry Dean Stanton. And now like Sherry and I are watching Big Love on HBO Max, and that's an old show, but he's the villain on that. And then he's been in a lot of David Lynch things, going back to David Lynch. Like he's in Straight Man, and he's in the new Twin Peaks that came out. And everyone in this movie is fucking incredible. Mm-hmm. And I want to go back to Ian Holm because, what do you call it? One of the points that I didn't even realize, just like that scene we were just discussing, and Clark Wolf makes this point too. She says that a lot of the shots with Ash are him by himself, whereas with the other cast members, it's usually like multiple cast members together. And it's like your mind kind of makes that connection of like, this guy's different. And then, of course, when you find out he's a robot, you're like, oh, okay.
Well,
it makes sense.
Now, am I misremembering? Because I haven't watched the actual film of Alien since I introduced it to Charlotte probably 2 years ago. Okay. I think there's a line where when you hear it, it just feels like a piece of throwaway dialogue where Dallas mentions to, maybe it's Ripley, about how Ash is a last minute replacement. He's like he's a medical officer and he was a last minute replacement.
Yes.
Like the other doctor got sick.
Right.
And so like that, those are like the little things that when you go back and actually watch Alien again, you pick up on. Mm-hmm. And like some of the looks that he has, like when Ash starts coughing, he almost has this look of like excitement, like, oh, it's gonna happen. Like everybody else is like, what the fuck's going on? And Ash is like,
Yep. Yeah. And just to kind of like prep people for our aliens conversation, it's kind of interesting because like Ash is so sinister and he like really is the representation of this corporation in Alien, which they don't really talk about Weyland-Yutani too much in this documentary. I don't think in Alien they even call it Weyland-Yutani. I think they just say the company a lot. And then once you get to Aliens, then it's like Weyland-Yutani.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because one other point I wanted to make before we ended was that so much of this is about Giger and the creation of the alien creature. And then you referenced Predator before. And it's interesting because like Predator and Alien are sort of intertwined at this point. And, the guy who essentially created the effective look of the Predator, Stan Winston. And then it's interesting because like, and then in Aliens, he made the alien queen. So they're kind of like their DNA is sort of like, wrapped up in each other. And did you have anything else you want to say about this documentary?
I mean, aside from go watch it, no, it's the best. The best part of a documentary about a film or a movie series. We've interviewed David Weiner several times, and he does documentaries about every 80s horror, 80s science fiction. But to do a deep dive 90 minutes on a movie and focus on just a few parts of that and to keep it compelling, it's hard to do. And this guy, Alexander O'Philippe, he's done it several times now. I think Leap of Faith, his Exorcist documentary, is still on Shudder. I think it is. 7852 is available on streaming. People versus George Lucas is available on streaming. So if you like this, if you go on Shudder and you like Memory, then you should check out his other work because it's really great stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. I am so thankful that you mentioned this documentary to me, and I'm glad that we covered this on this channel. Like I've said multiple times, Danny is also going to be around for when we talk about Aliens on the Anchorpete channel. And this is, even though we're recording it early, this is on Alien Day. So you can probably head over to the Anchorpete channel now and watch that video too. And then, of course, on the Comic Books Transform channel, we're talking about the first trade for the Alien comic, which was put out by Disney now. So, yeah, we love fucking Alien. We love this fucking movie. Danny is always putting up Shudder content on our channel, talking about things that are on Shudder. And what do we got coming up in the next week or so? I always put you right on the spot, right at the very end.
I know what I just did a short review of The Cellar, which is a new Shudder exclusive, which is genuinely scary, and I totally recommend everybody checking out. It's not a perfect movie, but it's scary as heck. And it has some of those Lovecraftian themes in there. Charlotte and I have done a few reviews of Shudder horror movies, Candyman, Halloween 3. Are we covering The Devils? Are we going to do The Devils next week?
Let's do The Devils next week, you and me.
Okay, yeah. Ken Russell's The Devils next week. Yeah. Definitely. And we're going to try to get a few interviews in over the next couple of weeks. Some authors, some other people. We'll see what happens. See what falls into place.
Yeah, we always got horror content coming on. Did I just say coming on you? We always got horror content coming out on this channel. But
you've been looking at way too many Francis Bacon paintings.
I think so. And then just Ash with all that white stuff and coming out of his mouth. Okay. Hey, wow, what a way to end this episode. But anyway, Danny's always putting out content on the channel. Like there's at least 3 videos per week, thanks to Danny. And then I'm usually in at least one of them. But if you haven't liked and subscribed to The Last Cast, please do. And we will burst out of y'all's chest